What if I told you that the most feared god in ancient Greece never actually wanted to be a villain? While Zeus parties on Mount Olympus and Poseidon rules the seas, a third brother is sitting in complete darkness, surrounded by the dead, doing a job nobody else wanted. His name is Hades, and everything you think you know about him is probably wrong. Let me ask you something. When you hear the name Hades, what comes to mind? A devil figure? Pure evil? Red skin? Horns? Maybe a pitchfork? That's exactly what centuries of misunderstanding have done to one of the most misrepresented figures in all of mythology. The truth is, Hades isn't the Greek Satan. He's not even close. In fact, he might be the most responsible, most dutiful god in the entire Greek pantheon. And that's precisely why his story matters, especially when we're talking about philosophy, duty, and what it means to accept the hand you're dealt in life. Here's the thing about Hades that most people don't know. He didn't choose to rule the underworld. He didn't wake up one day and think, you know what sounds fun? Spending eternity in darkness, managing dead people. No. After the Titans were defeated, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, drew lots to divide up the cosmos. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the seas, and Hades? He got the short straw. He got the underworld, the realm of the dead, the place everyone fears and nobody wants to visit. And you know what he did? He accepted it. No complaints, no rebellion, no dramatic tantrums. He just went down there and did his job for eternity. Think about that for a second. Imagine being told you have to spend forever doing something nobody else wants to do, in a place nobody wants to be, and you can't ever leave. Most of us complain about a bad shift at work or a boring meeting. Hades got the ultimate cosmic bad deal, and he handled it with more grace than most gods handled their blessings. That's not villainy. That's stoicism before stoicism was even a thing. But let's back up a bit and talk about who Hades actually is. In Greek mythology, Hades is the eldest son of the Titans Cronus and Rhea. Yes, eldest. That means he was the first one swallowed by his paranoid father, or who feared being overthrown by his children. He spent his early existence trapped in his father's stomach along with his siblings until Zeus came along, freed them all, and started the war against the Titans. Hades fought in that war, the Titanomachy, and he fought well. He had a helmet of invisibility, given to him by the Cyclopes, which made him an absolutely terrifying warrior. Imagine fighting someone you literally cannot see. The Titans didn't stand a chance. After the victory, the cosmos needed rulers. The old order was gone. The Titans were locked away in Tartarus, and now the three brothers had to figure out who got what. Some versions say they drew straws. Others say they drew lots from a helmet. Either way, it was a random chance. Fate. And Hades got the underworld. Now here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Hades could have refused. He could have started another war, challenged Zeus, made a fuss. The guy had just helped overthrow the most powerful beings in existence. He wasn't powerless. But he didn't. He accepted his role. Why? Because someone had to do it. The underworld isn't just some random place in Greek mythology. It's essential. It's where every single mortal goes when they die. It's the great equalizer, the final destination, the place that makes life meaningful precisely because it ends. Without the underworld, without death, there's no stakes, no urgency, no reason to value the time we have. And someone had to manage that. Someone had to maintain the natural order, to ensure that the dead stayed dead, that the boundaries between life and death remained intact. That someone was Hades. Let's talk about what the underworld actually looks like, because it's not the fire and brimstone torture chamber that later Christian interpretations made it out to be. The Greek underworld is divided into different sections. There are the asphodel meadows, where ordinary people go, essentially a neutral afterlife for those who were neither particularly good nor particularly bad. There's Elysium, the paradise reserved for heroes and the virtuous, where everything is beautiful and peaceful. Then there's Tartarus, the deep abyss reserved for the worst of the worst, where the Titans are imprisoned and where people who really messed up face punishment. And finally, There are the fields of punishment, where people who committed crimes are dealt with accordingly. Hades oversees all of this. He's not personally torturing anyone. He's not cackling maniacally or delighting in suffering. He's maintaining order. He's ensuring that justice is served, that people end up where they're supposed to be based on how they lived. He's basically the universe's most serious civil servant. And he's helped by a whole staff: Thanatos, the god of death; Charon, the ferryman who brings souls across the river Styx; the three judges Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who determine where souls should go; and of course Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the gates to make sure the dead don't leave and the living don't enter without permission. Now let's address the elephant in the room: Persephone. The story of Hades and Persephone is probably the most famous thing about him, and it's also the most controversial. Here's the traditional version. Hades sees Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and he falls in love. But he knows her mother will never approve of her daughter marrying the Lord of the Dead and living in the underworld. So he asks Zeus for permission. Zeus says yes, and Hades abducts Persephone, taking her to the underworld to be his queen. Demeter is devastated. She searches everywhere for her daughter, and in her grief, she causes all the plants to die, creating the first winter. Eventually, a deal is struck. Because Persephone ate pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she has to spend part of the year there with Hades and part of the year above ground with her mother. When she's below, winter comes. When she returns, spring arrives. Now, is this story problematic? Absolutely. By modern standards, it's kidnapping. There's no consent, there's no courtship, it's deeply problematic. But here's where we need to be careful about applying modern moral frameworks to ancient stories. In ancient Greece, arranged marriages were the norm. Women didn't typically choose their husbands. Fathers gave daughters away, and the stories reflected that reality. The Greeks didn't see Hades as a villain in this story. In fact, in many versions, Hades is portrayed as a devoted husband who treats Persephone with respect and even makes her an equal ruler of his realm. She becomes the queen of the underworld, not just a prisoner, and some later interpretations suggest she actually came to love him and embraced her role. What's philosophically interesting about this story isn't the abduction itself, but what it represents. It's about transformation, about the transition from innocence to experience, from spring to winter, from life to death. Persephone's journey to the underworld is a metaphor for maturity, for understanding that life contains darkness as well as light. She becomes one of the most powerful goddesses precisely because she bridges both worlds. She understands both life and death. That's wisdom. That's depth. And Hades, intentionally or not, is the catalyst for that transformation. But let's get back to Hades himself and what makes him so fascinating from a philosophical perspective. Unlike pretty much every other god in the Greek pantheon, Hades is not driven by ego. He doesn't demand worship. He doesn't interfere in mortal affairs. He doesn't seduce mortals or play petty games. Zeus can't keep it in his pants. Poseidon throws tantrums and causes earthquakes when he's angry. Ares loves war for war's sake. And Aphrodite causes chaos with her drama. But Hades? He just does his job. Day in, day out, for eternity. He sits on his throne in the underworld, and he maintains the cosmic order. There's something almost Buddhist about Hades when you think about it. He's accepted his fate. He's let go of desire for anything other than what he has, and he's found peace in duty. The ancient Greeks called him the Rich One because all the mineral wealth comes from beneath the earth, from his domain. But he's also rich in a different sense. He's rich in purpose, in meaning, in the knowledge that what he does matters. Every single person who has ever lived ends up in his realm eventually. Kings, beggars, heroes, villains, everyone. He treats them all the same. He doesn't play favorites, he doesn't take bribes, and he doesn't bend the rules. He is the ultimate impartial judge. Compare that to the other gods. Zeus is constantly breaking his own rules. Poseidon holds grudges for decades. Apollo and Artemis are petty and vindictive. Hera is consumed by jealousy. Ares is bloodthirsty. Dionysus encourages chaos. But Hades? Hades is consistent. Hades is fair. Hades is, dare I say it, the most moral of all the Olympians. And yet he's the one we've turned into a villain. Isn't that fascinating? Here's a question worth considering. Why did Hades become associated with evil? The answer is complicated, but it has a lot to do with fear and later religious interpretations. The Greeks feared death, as all humans do, and Hades ruled death. Therefore, Hades became something to fear. They didn't like saying his name out loud. They used euphemisms like Platon or the Rich One. But fear doesn't equal evil. We fear cancer, we fear natural disasters, but we don't call them morally evil. They just are. Death, justice. Hades, justice. Then Christianity came along, and early Christian theologians needed a devil figure, a lord of hell, someone to represent eternal punishment and evil. Hades' underworld, with its different sections and its judges and its punishments, got blended with Christian concepts of hell. Suddenly, the neutral, orderly realm of the dead became a place of fire and eternal torture. Hades, the dutiful administrator, became Satan, the embodiment of evil. It's a complete misunderstanding, but it stuck. For centuries, Western culture has conflated Hades with the devil, and it's only recently that people are starting to rediscover who he actually was in the original myths. Let's talk about some of the actual myths involving Hades, because there aren't that many, which itself is telling. Hades doesn't go looking for trouble. Trouble occasionally comes to him, but he's not out there causing problems. One of the most famous stories is the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, the legendary musician, loses his wife Eurydice to a snake bite. Overcome with grief, he travels to the underworld to get her back. He plays his lyre so beautifully that he charms everyone, including Hades and Persephone. They're so moved by his music and his love that they agree to let Eurydice return to the world of the living, but with one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead of her and not look back until they've both reached the surface. We all know how this ends. Orpheus looks back too soon, and Eurydice is pulled back into the underworld forever. But think about what this story tells us about Hades. He's moved by beauty, by love, by genuine emotion. He's willing to bend the rules, to show mercy, to give someone a second chance. Yes, the condition he sets is harsh, but it's also a test. Can Orpheus have faith? Can he trust? He can't, and that's tragic, but it's not Hades' fault. Hades gave him a chance that nobody else gets. He showed compassion in a realm where compassion is rare. That's not the action of a villain. Another famous myth involves Sisyphus, the king who cheated death. Sisyphus was clever, too clever, and he managed to trick Thanatos, the god of death, chaining him up so that nobody could die. This caused absolute chaos. Ares, the god of war, was furious because battles became meaningless if nobody could die. Eventually, Thanatos was freed, and Sisyphus was brought to the underworld. But even then, Sisyphus had one more trick. He told his wife not to perform funeral rites for him. And then, in the underworld, he complained to Persephone that he needed to go back to the surface to tell his wife to do the proper rites. She agreed, and Sisyphus escaped again. When he finally died for real, Hades had had enough. Sisyphus was given the famous punishment, rolling a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to have it roll back down each time he neared the top. Now, some people point to this as evidence of Hades being cruel. But is it? Sisyphus didn't just break the rules once. He broke them repeatedly. He disrespected death itself. He disrupted the natural order. He showed contempt for the very thing that makes life meaningful. His punishment is eternal, yes, but it's also fitting. He tried to achieve the impossible, to escape death. So now he performs an impossible task forever. It's poetic justice, not cruelty. And importantly, it's not arbitrary. Hades doesn't punish people on a whim. There's always a reason, always a logic to it. Then there's the story of Theseus and Pirithous, two heroes who decided, in their arrogance, to kidnap Persephone so that Pirithous could marry her. Yes, you read that right. They thought they could just walk into the underworld and steal the queen of the dead. Hades, being clever, invited them to sit down for a feast. They sat in the chairs of forgetfulness, and they couldn't get up. They were trapped there until Heracles came on one of his labors and freed Theseus. Pirithous, the one who actually wanted to kidnap Persephone, stayed trapped forever. Again, is this cruel? Or is it exactly what two arrogant mortals deserve for trying to kidnap a goddess? What all these stories show is that Hades is consistent. He has rules, he enforces those rules, and he doesn't make exceptions unless there's a very good reason. He's not sadistic, he's not evil, he's just doing his job. And his job is to maintain the boundary between life and death, to ensure that the natural order is preserved. That's not villainy, that's responsibility. Let's zoom out for a moment and think about what Hades represents philosophically. In many ways, he's the embodiment of acceptance. He accepted his role, he accepted his domain, he accepted his fate. There's no record of him complaining, of him trying to overthrow Zeus, of him wanting what his brothers have. He's content, or at least resigned, to his lot. In a world where everyone wants more, wants different, wants better, Hades stands as a reminder that sometimes the path to peace is accepting what is. He also represents inevitability. Death comes for everyone. Rich, poor, good, bad, it doesn't matter. Everyone ends up in Hades' realm eventually. He's the great equalizer, the final truth that nobody can escape. In our modern world, we spend so much time and energy trying to avoid thinking about death, trying to stay young, trying to cheat mortality. But Hades reminds us that this is futile. Death will come, and when it does, it doesn't care about your status, your wealth, or your accomplishments. All that matters is how you lived. There's also something to be said about Hades and duty. He does a job that nobody wants, that nobody appreciates, that nobody even likes to think about. But he does it anyway because it needs to be done. How many of us can say the same? How many of us are willing to do difficult, thankless work simply because it's necessary? Hades never gets praised, never gets worshipped the way Zeus or Athena do, never gets epic poems written about his adventures. But he keeps going. That's the definition of duty. And then there's the aspect of fairness and justice. Hades doesn't play favorites. When you die, you're judged based on your actions in life, not on who you knew or how much you prayed or whether you were royalty. The underworld is the ultimate meritocracy. Good people go to Elysium, bad people face punishment, and everyone else ends up in the asphodel meadows. It's simple, it's clear, it's fair. Compare that to the world of the living, where the gods constantly interfere, where Zeus's favorites get divine help, and his enemies face divine wrath, where everything is arbitrary and chaotic. The underworld, under Hades' rule, is the one place in Greek mythology where things actually make sense. Now, I want to address something important. Some modern interpretations have tried to redeem Hades by making him a misunderstood good guy. And while I appreciate the effort to correct centuries of mischaracterization, we shouldn't go too far in the other direction either. Hades isn't a hero. He's not particularly warm or friendly. He's stern, he's severe, he's inflexible. He kidnapped Persephone, even if by ancient standards that was acceptable. He's not someone you'd want to hang out with. But that doesn't make him a villain. It makes him complex, nuanced, and real. The ancient Greeks understood something we often forget. Not everything fits into neat categories of good and evil. Hades is neither. He's necessary. He's the shadow that makes the light meaningful. He's the ending that makes the story matter. Without death, without Hades, life would have no value. We treasure our time because we know it's limited. We love deeply because we know we'll lose. We strive for meaning because we know it won't last forever. Hades, in ruling death, makes all of that possible. There's a reason that in ancient Greek culture, people rarely spoke directly about Hades. It wasn't because he was evil, it was because he was powerful in a way that the other gods weren't. Zeus could be manipulated, Poseidon could be appeased, and Athena could be reasoned with. But Hades? Hades was absolute. When your time came, you went to him, and there was no negotiating, no bargaining, no escape. That kind of absolute power is terrifying, yes, but it's also strangely comforting. Death is certain. The underworld is certain. Whatever chaos exists in life, whatever unfairness and randomness and confusion, at the end, there's Hades, and there are rules, and there is order. I think one of the reasons Hades fascinates us today is because we live in a world that desperately needs what he represents. We need people who do their duty without seeking glory. We need fairness and consistency in systems that feel increasingly arbitrary. We need to accept that some things, like death, are inevitable, and fighting against them is futile. We need to remember that the uncomfortable, unglamorous work still needs to be done by someone. Hades never gets the glory. He never gets the stories where he saves the day or wins the girl or gets celebrated. He just sits on his throne, day after day, century after century, millennium after millennium, doing the work that keeps the cosmos functioning. And there's something deeply admirable about that. In a culture that worships celebrity and fame and attention, Hades is the ultimate anti-celebrity. He's famous, yes, but not because he sought fame. He's famous because his role is inescapable. Think about the contrast between Hades and Zeus for a moment. Zeus is king of the gods, ruler of the sky, the most powerful Olympian. And what does he do with that power? He seduces mortal women. He plays favorites among humans. He overthrows anyone who threatens him. He starts conflicts. He's petty and jealous and proud. He's everything we say we don't want in a leader, and yet he's in charge. Hades, meanwhile, has power over every single soul that has ever lived or will ever live. He has an entire realm to himself. He could be a tyrant. He could be cruel. He could abuse that power in countless ways. But he doesn't. He follows the rules. He maintains order. He treats everyone equally. If you were designing a god from scratch, if you wanted to create someone worthy of worship and respect, would you create Zeus? Or would you create Hades? I know which one I'd choose. But here's the tragedy. The good guy doesn't always get recognized. The person doing the hard, necessary work doesn't always get the applause. Hades is the cosmic reminder of this truth. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't to be celebrated. Maybe the point is to do what needs to be done, regardless of whether anyone notices or cares. There's a concept in existentialist philosophy about creating meaning in a meaningless universe. Sisyphus, rolling his boulder up the hill, becomes a symbol of this. Albert Camus wrote about imagining Sisyphus happy, finding meaning and purpose in the struggle itself, not in the outcome. But you know what? That's exactly what Hades does every single day. He's in a dark realm, surrounded by death, doing a job that never ends, and he keeps doing it. He finds meaning in the duty itself. He is, in a very real sense, the ultimate existentialist hero. We've talked a lot about what Hades represents, but let's talk about what he teaches us. First, he teaches us acceptance. Not passive resignation, but active acceptance of reality. He didn't get the domain he wanted, but he made it his own. He found purpose in what he was given. How many of us are still fighting against our circumstances instead of working within them? Second, he teaches us about duty. Not the exciting, glamorous kind of duty, but the everyday, grinding, necessary kind. The kind that doesn't get rewarded but keeps everything functioning. Third, he teaches us about fairness. In his realm, everyone is equal. Everyone faces the same judgment. There's no corruption, no nepotism, no special treatment. Imagine if we applied that principle to our own systems of justice. And finally, he teaches us about the necessity of endings. Without death, without finality, nothing matters. The underworld gives life its meaning. As we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a thought. We've spent centuries making Hades into a villain, projecting our fears about death onto the god who rules it. But what if we've had it backwards this whole time? What if Hades isn't the villain of Greek mythology, but the tragic hero, the one who sacrificed his own happiness for the good of the cosmos? The one who took on a burden nobody else wanted and carried it without complaint? The one who maintained order and justice in a world full of chaos and favoritism? Maybe it's time to rehabilitate Hades, not by making him softer or nicer or more palatable, but by understanding him for what he actually is. A complex figure who represents duty, inevitability, fairness, and acceptance. A god who isn't good or evil, but necessary. A reminder that the hardest jobs often fall to those who don't seek glory, and that true strength lies in accepting your role and doing it well. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this. If you were given a choice between a life of fame and pleasure but no real purpose, like Zeus, or a life of obscurity and duty but genuine meaning, like Hades, which would you choose? And more importantly, which choice would make you a better person? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to know what you think. And here's the thing about Hades that we should all remember. Every single one of us will meet him eventually. When your time comes, when you cross that river Styx and stand before the Lord of the Underworld, what will your life have meant? Will you have lived with honor, with purpose, with acceptance of your role in the grand scheme of things? Or will you have spent your whole life wanting to be someone else, somewhere else, doing something else? Hades doesn't care about your excuses. He doesn't care about what you wanted or what you wished you'd done. He only cares about what you actually did. And something is clarifying about that. Something that cuts through all the noise and distraction and gets to the heart of what matters. Your life, your choices, your actions. That's what you'll be judged on. So maybe the real lesson of Hades isn't about death at all. Maybe it's about life. About making the most of the time you have. About accepting your circumstances and finding meaning within them. About doing your duty even when it's hard. Even when nobody's watching. Even when you don't get credit. About treating others fairly regardless of their status. About understanding that endings aren't evil. They're necessary. And they're what make everything else meaningful. Hades sits in his dark throne room, the helm of darkness beside him, Cerberus at his feet, Persephone at his side, and he watches as every soul that has ever lived passes through his realm. And he knows something that we often forget, that in the end, we all end up in the same place. That death is the great equalizer. What matters isn't how much power you had, or how much wealth you accumulated, or how famous you became. What matters is how you lived, how you treated others, whether you did your duty, and whether you found meaning in your existence. The Dark Lord of the Underworld isn't dark because he's evil. He's dark because he dwells in the shadows, in the places we don't want to look, in the truths we don't want to face. But those shadows are part of reality. That darkness is part of life. And Hades, in ruling it, in accepting it, in maintaining it, does us all a service that we rarely acknowledge but desperately need. So the next time you think of Hades, don't think of horns and pitchforks and eternal torture. Think of a god sitting on a throne, doing a job that lasts forever, that nobody appreciates, that nobody wants, but that keeps the entire cosmos functioning. Think of duty, of fairness, of acceptance, of the dignity in doing necessary work. Think of the reminder that life is precious precisely because it ends. And maybe, just maybe, we could all learn something from the god we turned into a devil. If this video made you think differently about Hades, about duty, about death, or about what it means to accept your role in life, smash that like button. And if you want more philosophical deep dives into mythology, history, and the big questions that keep us up at night, subscribe to this channel. Because we're just getting started, and trust me, there are a lot more stories that need to be retold, a lot more misunderstood figures who deserve a second look, and a lot more wisdom hidden in the myths we thought we knew. Let me leave you with one more thing to think about. There's a reason the ancient Greeks had so much respect for Hades, even if they feared him. They understood something fundamental about existence that we've forgotten in our modern age. They understood that you can't have light without darkness, life without death, joy without sorrow. Everything exists in balance, and Hades represents that necessary counterweight. In our culture today, we're obsessed with positivity, with success, with happiness, with living forever through technology or medicine or whatever the latest trend is. We treat death like a disease that needs to be cured, like an enemy that needs to be defeated. But the Greeks knew better. They knew that death isn't the enemy. Death is the friend who gives life its urgency, its beauty, its meaning. And Hades is the guardian of that truth. When you look at it that way, Hades becomes less of a god to fear and more of a god to respect. He's not trying to kill you. He's not hoping you fail. He's not waiting gleefully for your demise. He's just there, patient and eternal, waiting to do his job when the time comes. And when that time does come, he'll judge you fairly. He'll treat you the same as everyone else, and he'll ensure that the cosmic order is maintained. There's a strange comfort in that, isn't there? In knowing that no matter what chaos exists in life, death is certain, the underworld is waiting, and there are rules that even gods must follow. I think we need Hades now more than ever. We need his reminder that not everything is about glory and fame. We need his example of doing difficult work without seeking recognition. We need his fairness in a world that feels increasingly unfair. We need his acceptance in a culture that tells us to never be satisfied. We need his darkness to balance out all the artificial light. And here's something else to consider. Hades never asks for worship. He doesn't demand sacrifices or build temples or create cults of personality. He just is. He exists in his realm, doing his work, maintaining the boundary between life and death. Compare that to literally every other god, every other ruler, every other powerful figure who demands tribute, demands recognition, demands that you bow down and acknowledge their greatness. Hades demands nothing. He simply fulfills his function. That's real power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The more I think about Hades, the more I realize that he might be the most punk rock god in the entire pantheon. He doesn't care what you think of him. He doesn't try to be liked. He doesn't conform to anyone's expectations. He does his job, he does it well, and he doesn't apologize for it. In a world full of people desperate for approval, desperate to be seen, desperate to matter, Hades is the ultimate rejection of all that. He matters because his function matters, not because anyone validates him. There's a lesson there for all of us. How much of our lives do we waste seeking approval, seeking recognition, trying to prove ourselves to people who don't really matter? What would it be like to be as secure in our purpose as Hades is in his? What would it be like to do our work, whatever that work is, with the same steady commitment, regardless of whether anyone notices or cares? I'm not saying we should all become grim and serious and isolated like Hades, but maybe we could borrow a little bit of his energy. Maybe we could focus more on doing what needs to be done and less on making sure everyone knows we're doing it. Maybe we could find peace in accepting our circumstances instead of constantly fighting against them. Maybe we could treat others with the fairness and equality that Hades shows to every soul that enters his realm. And here's the final piece of the puzzle. Hades, for all his association with death and darkness, is actually the god of wealth. Not the flashy wealth of gold and jewels, though those come from his domain too. The real wealth, the wealth of the earth, the minerals and resources that make civilization possible. Everything valuable comes from beneath the surface, from the depths, from the darkness. You have to dig deep to find what's truly precious. And isn't that a perfect metaphor? The things that matter most in life, truth, meaning, purpose, character, they're not on the surface. You have to go deep. You have to be willing to descend into uncomfortable places. You have to face the darkness to find the treasure. Hades has been there all along, in the darkness, surrounded by wealth that most people never see because they're too afraid to look. He's not hiding it. He's not hoarding it. It's just there, waiting for those brave enough or curious enough to seek it out. And that wealth isn't just material. It's wisdom, it's perspective, it's understanding. The kind of understanding that only comes from facing mortality, from accepting endings, from sitting with discomfort instead of running from it. So when you think about Hades, think about what treasures might be waiting in the dark places you've been avoiding. What truths are you not facing because they're uncomfortable? What duties are you neglecting because they're not glamorous? What wisdom are you missing because you're too focused on the surface, on the bright and shiny things that don't really matter? The Dark Lord of the Underworld has been misunderstood for thousands of years. We've made him into a monster, a devil, an embodiment of evil. But the truth is so much more interesting, so much more complex, so much more valuable. Hades is duty, fairness, acceptance, and inevitability. He's the reminder that endings are necessary, that darkness has value, that the hardest work often goes unrecognized, and that true power doesn't need to announce itself. Every mythology needs a Hades. Every story needs an ending. Every life needs death to give it meaning. And every one of us needs to learn the lessons that the Lord of the Underworld has been teaching for millennia. Accept what is, do your duty, treat others fairly, and understand that the darkness isn't evil, it's just the other half of existence. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the Titanomachy to the abduction of Persephone, from Orpheus and Eurydice to Sisyphus and his boulder, from the structure of the underworld to the philosophical implications of death and duty. But the real journey isn't through these myths. It's through the ideas they represent. It's through understanding that the figures we've been taught to fear might actually be the ones who have the most to teach us. So here's my final question, and I really want you to engage with this. What's your underworld? What's the dark, difficult place in your life that you've been avoiding? What's the duty you need to accept, the truth you need to face, the ending you need to acknowledge? And what would it look like to approach it with the dignity and acceptance that Hades shows? Think about it and share your thoughts in the comments. Because these conversations matter, these reflections matter, this community we're building here matters. Thanks for watching, and remember, we all meet Hades eventually. The question is, what will you have done with your time before then?